and they work together, controlling the money flow and diverting government resources.
As far as the cars for clunkers is concerned, it might be a kind of a new feature to federal government. But we've had programs like that for years at the state level. I can remember back in the 60s, 70s, on your state income tax form, there was all kinds of boxes to check if you did the right things and bought the right things, and they were subsidizing all kinds of ecology-friendly things like electric cars and solar panels, and they've been doing that for years. So there's really nothing new about government subsidies for some really good type of thing.
Right, so that's probably the most benign level of coercion, is that subsidies and, in effect, lower level price fixing. And the next level up seems to be the nationalization, or the threat of it, and threat of over-regulation, brings corporations in line with changing their product lines to what the statists want them to be. So they're going to tell them what kind of cars they need to be, not only by regulation, but even just suggesting what they need to be. They made a big deal about the Chevy Volt being rolled out.
Well,
230 miles.
Yes, that's a real danger here, because the federal government now has gotten a controlling interest in General Motors, and that's a real dream come true for all the politicians and bureaucrats to be deciding what kind of cars General Motors will produce. And of course they're going to go to the eco-friendly cars, but the problem is that the public is going to be too stupid to buy them. So then they're going to have all these cars that people won't buy at the price that it costs to produce them and make a profit, so they're going to have to be subsidized in order for them to be sold. And you can see this coming. This is just down the road, 5-10 years. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's going to be, GM is going to be called Government Motors, and it's going to have all these cars that are subsidized.
Right. I saw the guy who was in charge of the Volt product line talking about it and saying, and they asked, after they got done asking the technical questions, they said, well, how much does it cost? And he said, well, it's a little high. It's $40,000, but you can apply for
with a subsidy,
government rebate.
Down to 20-something. Exactly. I mean, yoo-hoo, the subsidy is paid for by taxpayers.
Yep. Yeah. And then that money comes out of circulation where it could have been used, by someone, by the person that originally had it, where they could make the decisions at our level at the end.
Well, they say socialism is the great fiction that we can all live at the expense of each other. I think the subsidy game is the great fiction that we can all be subsidized by each other.
Yeah, it's the same effect. It's just it's reality.
Put in for a copyright on that expression.
You better, because we're gonna need that kind of wisdom. And I'm glad we're getting a lot of pushback in the healthcare arena. But let's go to one of the more root causes and talk more about the Fed and what it's been doing in the recent month or so, or 6 weeks. We haven't heard a lot about the Fed because the whole healthcare story kind of took over.
We're going from the comical and the sublime here to the very serious.
Yeah.
Going from cars for clunkers, cash for clunkers, to the Fed, because cash for clunkers is kind of a comic relief, but the Fed is a big serious business.
Right. Now that we're operating on the $1 trillion levels, and the article from, I think it's the Wall Street Journal, about Bernanke's exit dilemma, saying that questioning whether Bernanke's claim that he could throttle back or he could prevent inflation by taking the money back.
Yes, well, what do you
that he printed?
What did you expect? It reminds you of the little black girl in the Gone with the Wind that says, "I don't know nothing about birthing no babies." Did you expect him to say, I don't know nothing about stopping no inflation? He'll say that later, by the time he retires.
Yeah, it won't be his problem, I think is what he's hoping,
Yeah, he has to fake it at this point and pretend he knows what he's doing.
Right. So right now he is keeping the prime rate as low as possible, near 0.25% or something like that. So what he calls full throttle credit, incentivizing, and beyond that, he's been essentially printing money by buying treasury bills that apparently the foreign governments are not buying enough of them, and without getting into all this shenanigans.
You just can't dump that much extra debt onto the marketplace and expect it to sell. I mean, there's not a market for that. Somebody had to buy it, and so naturally the Fed had to step up and do that. I mean, I used the word had to. I mean, they of course wouldn't have had to, but they did, and that's the only reason that the government is still spending all this money.
Right. And they basically they're financing, as they did in the 30s and in the 70s. They helped to finance the large federal deficit, financing World War II, financing Vietnam, financing lots of other projects, welfare state actions back in the 60s. All that Federal Reserve helped, and then when the inflation took off in the 70s, they finally did bring in Paul Volcker to crank the interest rate up.
They have a sordid history.
Yeah, the inflation got away from them in those cases, and what they claim he can get it back by pulling some of these tricks about actually paying interest on some of the loans that he's given to the banks. And it looks, when I read through it without trying to deconstruct it, because it's very complex how they work, these bond buys and security buys back and forth with the Treasury Department and the major banks. But basically, they think that by giving the banks a lot of reserves, that encourages them to keep loaning, but at what they think is a healthy level, and keeping the economy going. And if they don't do that, they think the economy will just shut down and collapse, which I don't believe. I don't know what you think about that, but that was their premise in the bailouts originally, and it's their premise now for continuing to finance the banks and keeping their reserves high by essentially printing and handing them money. They think that,
keep in mind that this bank bailout started in the Bush administration, so this is not a Democratic thing. It's a Republican-Democrat. Basically, it's a government thing.
Right. They are continuing to subsidize, or falsely, kind of, I think, keep the economy running at a rate that they think is tolerable. In other words, slowing the contraction by injecting kind of artificial, stimulants. I mean, we already our bubble is burst because we borrowed and spent too much, and now they're just doing more of it. Well, I think we need actually a credit contraction to shake out the companies and the banks that overextended, and they're not allowing that to happen. So.
Well, that's right. What I've read is that we have way too many banks and overregulated in this country, and what we should have done is let the big banks